And now, I would like to introduce the electromagnetic spectrum. How was my announcer voice? Not good. Sorry. Okay. This is cool. And I'm not even going to try to draw this, so I would like the electromagnetic spectrum to be pasted right here below me. Thank you very much. All right. Now, I want to introduce you to all the light that we cannot see. Okay? There's this visible spectrum that we see, but if you either lower the frequency or increase the frequency, there are this other realm of electromagnetic radiation that we can't see, but we use them all in one way or another. Okay? Starting with radio waves. Radio waves are very low frequency, very long wavelength. They can be as long as 1 kilometer long to about the size of like a human being, so like a couple of meters, right? And it turns out these waves are very convenient because they're big. They're big. So we can they can carry other information. We can fit other higher frequency signals within them, and we can send them off to radio towers, to cars, to dishes that collect that information and bring it to our televisions, right? Radio waves were one of the first electromagnetic radiations besides light that we could actually use for very, very powerful communication purposes. Yeah. So you all know about radio waves. I don't need to say anything more than that. But moving on to a little bit higher frequency is microwaves. And microwaves are about the size of like a centimeter, all right? Maybe the size of like a bug, okay? And you're like, yeah, I know about microwaves. I know, like, you put the food in the thing and you heat it up, right? So yes, those devices that heat our food actually do use microwave radiation. And the way that it works is you have this changing electromagnetic field inside the microwave, and then you guys know that water is a polar molecule, and so that changing electromagnetic field makes that dipole switch back and forth. So it's almost like, it's using friction to heat that up, right? Like you're giving these little polar molecules all this energy, almost like a rug burn, but inside the waters. And anything with water will actually start to get warmer, which is why your food warms up. Okay. That's not the only place that we use microwaves, though. The most common application is not even the microwave anymore. It is the cell phone. So cell phones communicate using microwave radiation. And there's a lot of debates about whether that's, biologically safe or healthy for us. And the jury's still out. But a lot of people that believe that it's not a problem, they cite the fact that microwave radiation is so much bigger than our cells, right? In other words, it can't fit in our cells. It can't knock out genetic information the way that higher frequency, lower wavelength radiation can. So we'll see where the research goes in the next few years on that, okay? After microwave radiation, the next higher frequency, lower wavelength, is infrared. And infrared is the energy that corresponds with heat often. So in other words, there are some types of life that actually see an infrared because they're carnivores. All they care about is whether something's alive or not, and things that are alive tend to be a little bit warmer, right? So, for example, if a spider, is looking at its web, it doesn't care about the colors of that web. It cares about the one juicy living fly that's on there, which will show up as a distinct color in its own eyes because of its heat signature. And the spider knows that it can just go over there and gobble it up. Infrared radiation is also used in remote controls often. So that's the signal that tells your TV to change the station. Okay, after infrared is our visible light. This is about the size of actual little protozoans, right? So we're getting much smaller and much higher frequency. This is the radiation that's kind of useful for us in order to go about our day-to-day business. The next step above that, even higher frequency, lower wavelength, about the size of a molecule in terms of its wavelength. That is ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light has a ton of interesting applications, one of which it is the dominant frequency that comes from the sun. And the interesting thing about that is that radiation is actually, because it's the size of molecules, it's small enough to actually have biological effects on the body, like very significant. The most obvious biological effect that we know of is the sunburn, right? So the ultraviolet radiation is transferring energy into our skin and actually is altering it in such a way that our skin color changes, right? Which is interesting. And doing that enough means actually damaging your cells, right? It's one thing that as I get older and older, I have to start worrying about is how much the sun is damaging my face and how leathery I'm going to look in a couple of years. So ultraviolet radiation is also seen in black lights. It has this kind of interesting interaction, like semi-visible interaction, where certain invisible features, like the stains on my shirt, are actually more visible when I put it under a black light or ultraviolet radiation. Next up after that is the X-ray. That's even smaller wavelength radiation. That is about the size of atoms, okay? And obviously this has applications because you can use it for biomedical imaging, right? So if I have my hand here and I shoot a bunch of X-rays, okay, my bones will absorb them, but my tissues won't. So bones are heavy and thick and have the ability to absorb X-rays, but my tissue is mostly water, right? And so the X-rays can slip right through. So if I have a little X-ray sensitive screen here, it lights up where the X-rays pass through, right? And it doesn't light up where there's actual bone, okay? And so consequently, we can actually begin to see what is happening inside our bodies, right? Even though we can't see it with our normal visible light, which is pretty cool. Lastly, there's gamma ray radiation, which doesn't have a heck of a lot of applications outside of comic books, but man, in comic books, that gamma ray radiation is very, very present. And it's the result of most superhero powers. Really though, it's super dangerous, and you don't want to spend too much time around gamma rays because they're so small and so high energy that they can really do damage to cells and genes. And, well, you don't really want to see the consequences of that. One thing to say before I move on from the electromagnetic spectrum is very rarely do we see any of these in isolation. Every body has a spectrum of radiation, right? Including, human beings, right? Including this computer that I'm looking at right now. Everything is giving off a certain spectrum of radiation at different intensities, and that depends on its temperature, right? But for example, you even give off the occasional gamma ray. It's not a lot to really do anything to each other, right? We're not really hurting each other with our gamma rays, but we have a spectrum, a certain spectrum, kind of like this, right? Where if this is I for intensity and this is frequency, we are giving off a certain set of, at this frequency, a certain set of radio waves, let's say, we're giving off a few of those. A certain set of visible light, obviously we're giving off quite a bit of that because we can see each other. And then way at the tip top here, we're giving off actually some X-rays and gamma rays too, okay? And so this little curve is almost like a fingerprint for every body. Every body at a certain temperature gives off like some spectrum of all of these frequencies, which is interesting. There's an often made joke about people who work at like nuclear power plants, and they're like, aren't you concerned about how much radiation you're getting working at the power plant? And a common response, which actually is true, is I get more radiation sleeping with my partner for the night than I do from working one full day at a nuclear power plant, and that's the reason why that's true. Okay, all right. In the next video, we're going to begin quantifying some of this electromagnetic radiation thing by talking about a relationship between the speed of waves, the frequency of waves, and the wavelength of waves.